Great. Well, hi everyone. I'm Ned Cooper, and I'm presenting this paper from fitting participation to forging relationships, the art of participatory machine learning, on behalf of my co-author, Alex Safiroglu, and we're both from the Australian National University. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that I conducted the work for this presentation on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay respect to elders past and present. At the outset, I also wanted to note a couple of past roles that really spurred my interest in this area. Previously, I worked in Guatemala with Transparency International, that's shown on the left of the slide. And part of my job there was really facilitating the participation of community members as volunteers in election monitoring activities. And then in Australia on the right, I've worked for a few different organisations to kind of get input from young Aboriginal people on law reform topics. So these were both kind of facilitative roles, really fascinating roles, but they were really focused on bridging interests and communication styles of very different stakeholders. So I was really drawn to participatory machine learning in my PhD, which, as we all know, sort of advocates for a shift out of labs and away from the agency of technologists and towards understanding the lived experience of data subjects. But as many of you will know, the emergence of participatory machine learning has really been accompanied by these concerns about participation washing. And more recently, several authors have surveyed projects in the field and demonstrated a gap between the goals of the field and actual practices. But nonetheless, there's successful case studies of meaningful participation in machine learning development projects, and those have gained recognition in research and community contexts. So Alex and I were kind of interested in interviewing people who are doing the facilitation work in those projects. We kind of define these, they're not a sort of defined role, but we were defining them as participation brokers. So they're researchers, practitioners, activists, probably many of the people on the call, who facilitate the inclusion of participants in developing a system and then implement feedback from those participants into development processes. So we conducted interviews with brokers in various settings and locations. We tried to interview a reasonable portion from the Global South to really understand their challenges and strategies for facilitating meaningful participation. So over the next few slides, I'll present our findings across the high-level stages of a machine learning project shown on the left of the screen. I've tried to keep the presentation really short and just focus on practically useful information, but there's more in the paper and I'll share a link at the end of the presentation. So firstly, how do relationships form? So brokers we spoke to often relied on prior relationships to recruit participants, and they really sort of actively made certain people into participants. In most cases, that meant prioritizing the intended users of a system. However, people really found engaging indirect stakeholders. So these are, often talked about as like the people affected by, but maybe not directly using a system. That was really challenging to engage those folk. And some actually really questioned whether it was feasible at all and desirable at all to incorporate those stakeholders into development processes. Then at the stage of formulating a problem, a common challenge was translating the kind of general discussions they'd have with partners about organizational and community problems into potential machine learning capabilities. To overcome that challenge, many brokers really use demos and prototypes, often at things like roadshows, to engage participants and help them envisage potential applications. As one interviewee explained, very few people understand what we're even trying to achieve until they see a model do something in practice. And then during data collection and labeling, brokers discussed the challenge of really getting participants to express their interests in a form a machine would understand. Several brokers actually created pretty in-depth tutorials and training for participants to learn about machine learning generally, like the development process generally. So it was really clear why brokers needed data in a particular way. But actually, in many cases, this stage led to frustration for some participants who might have engaged in some community engagement activities, expecting to sort of discuss some of the problems or concerns they might have in their community, and then the focus of the engagement activity really narrowed to these rigid data requirements for machine learning. Model development was consistently identified as the most challenging stage for participant involvement. There was really few dependable tools or methods for participatory machine learning at this stage. But several brokers instead prioritized model evaluation. They sort of argued that model development would require resources to train participants that would far exceed that of data work. And in some cases, it was seen as less consequential for the performance of the resulting systems than the earlier stages like data work. So model evaluation became a key site for participants to determine whether a model really improved on the existing systems used by a community or an organization. It was when it was ready for deployment. So overall, participatory projects really bridge gaps in understanding about both the technical aspects of machine learning and the social contexts of deployments. But after projects finished, I think this is probably a common experience for many people, that the desire for like generalizability in publication venues didn't always really match the situated nature of a lot of participatory work. Some people talked about some strategies to scale the work, and that often involved getting the participatory approach right with one group and then fine-tuning any resulting system with other groups. Ultimately, however, this imperative to kind of fit participation into machine learning workflows implies an asymmetric division of learning, that brokers kind of decide what participants learn about machine learning while gaining insights from participants' contextual knowledge. So in the paper, we propose evolution in the role of brokers. I actually kind of think firstly we need to recognize this as a really important role with distinct skill sets in kind of some understanding of data science, some experience of community engagement, and then really importantly, some experience navigating organizations where these systems are developed and deployed. But then also to evolve from facilitators to activists. And this means really forging ongoing relationships with participants to create alternative visions for machine learning systems rather than trying to just focusing on fitting participation into established engineering processes. So we briefly described two strategies for brokers to embrace this activist orientation. And the first is prioritizing education and advocacy for end users. So again, this is often focusing on developing accessible resources to help participants understand machine learning. And then secondly, attending to the frustration and dissent expressed by many indirect stakeholders and recognizing that as valid feedback for machine learning design. I think there's kind of an opportunity here to think about qualitative stories and storytelling and how we might translate them into feedback for technical development processes. Easy to say, very hard to do, but I think it's certainly an opportunity and something I'm interested in working in more. Thanks for listening. That's a quick overview of the paper. There's a link on the screen if you're interested in finding it there. But yeah, thanks. I'm looking forward to the chat.